One thing I want to say about today's show, some people are talking about very personal, very traumatic events, about losing children, and it's tough, but it's important, and we want the show to go ahead, and we want you to listen to it. But if that might become too much for you, maybe turn off. And if there are children listening,
it's definitely not. I don't think it's suitable for
young children.
For young children,
but it's suitable maybe for teenagers. But you listen to it, have a listen. It's the truth, but the truth can be very, very tough to take sometimes. So you make your decision.
This is our trigger warning for today's show.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Anne McElhenney.
And I'm Phelim McAleer.
And welcome to the Anne and Phelim Scoop.
Yes.
From a rainy Ireland, by the way.
A very rainy Ireland. After the 2-day heat wave.
Yes, we had a 2-day heat wave. Like really genuinely heat wave. But I looked it up. I decided I would look it up for all the people who are complaining in Ireland that we're having some kind of extreme climate emergency. The last time it was as hot as this was in 1887, where it was actually 33 degrees centigrade. It was only 28 degrees centigrade at the weekend. So
how many SUVs were in Ireland in 1877?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. All right. Well, no, talk about this week, Phelim. Something extraordinary happened this week that we decided we'd have to spend the whole podcast talking about.
This is a special podcast. It's about one topic only, but it really sums up America at the moment and problems and the solutions.
Yeah.
And how great it is to live in America at the moment that we have an administration that is tackling these solutions in interesting and innovative ways. So there was a single conference in DC last week that may mean sanity and justice are coming back to America. It could be the end. It could be the beginning of the end. Let's hope it is.
And it's kind of a weird venue, right? It's not where you would expect something dramatic and fabulous to happen, but the Federal Trade Commission have done something really, really quite extraordinary. They brought together a bunch of extraordinary people to talk about the harms that are being perpetrated on the youngest among us, and the most vulnerable, by the way, population among us, children.
Yes, the Federal Trade Commission had a workshop aimed at exposing and detailing how the trans industry has been using and abusing our children to make money and push an evil ideology. So
the workshop,
the workshop was exposing doctors, hospitals. These doctors and hospitals should be very, very nervous, and we're going to bring you the full stories.
And it's kind of, as I said, it's kind of a very weird venue that you wouldn't have expected something as extraordinary as this to have happened in a place like that. And I just love the chairman that Trump has appointed to the Federal Trade Commission. I mean, he's, you kind of think, the chairman of the Trade Commission is going to be like super boring. He'd be looking at people who are selling vitamin tablets or whatever. But his opening statement, where he laid out what they planned to do, what they were planning to, what we were going to hear during the conference and what they're planning to do at the Trade Commission was extraordinary.
Before we talk about that, we want to give you the full details. The workshop was called Workshop on Unfair or Deceptive Trade Practices in Gender Affirming Care. Right? So it featured physicians, mental health professionals, detransitioners and their family members, even lawmakers and law enforcement. And they give their insights and updates, not only on the damage the trans madness has done to kids and families, but how they're rooting out the corruption, how they're destroying it, how it will be stopped, and how those responsible will have to face the consequences. And it's important to say this was not a talking shop. This was not one of those conferences.
No.
This was the prelude and in some cases an update to the ongoing criminal and civil investigation into the gender destruction. There were crimes committed against children.
Yes.
And in my view, there are crimes committed amongst vulnerable adults as well, but I'm not sure they're going into that. There were crimes, and now there will be punishments. Basically, the Federal Trade Commission is treating transgender ideology and medication and surgery just like those people who sell you fake cures or fake goods, because that's what they are, fake cures and fake goods. If you could prosecute, and we've talked about this, prosecute and persecute the Sackler family over the opioid crisis, and they prosecuted and persecuted CVS and all the pharmacies and the doctors and the sales reps. These were people selling opioids to adults.
Mm-hmm.
Then why couldn't you prosecute and persecute doctors and responsible people for peddling the gender ideology and gender surgery to 14-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, giving them testosterone, destroying their lives?
But we'll find out, during the conference, this is one of the things that came out basically is that, obviously the problem with it is if they're lying, and this is what's happened. They're lying. They're saying things to children who are vulnerable. They're saying, we're going to cure you of your depression by cutting your breasts off, your healthy breasts off. And it's a lie. It's a complete lie, and there's no data to back up any of this. But before we get to that, I actually thought one of the funny things about this FTC thing was it reminded me of Al Capone. So the mafia, they couldn't get Al Capone. There was a whole problem with getting Al Capone. They just couldn't get him. And in the end, they got him. It was the IRS who got him in the end. It was a tax man who got him in the end. And in some ways, this feels a little bit like that. It feels like the FTC. It's kind of it's a kind of a weird angle, but it's not a weird angle.
No, it's not.
Because
No,
it's trade. And by the way, that's a very, very important aspect of this.
Indeed.
People are making millions and millions and millions of dollars. Individual doctors are making millions of dollars. But also, by the way, drug companies are really laughing.
Yes.
Because if you do this to a child, they will be medicated for the rest of their lives. Yes. And that's not, that's a nice cash cow, right? For the rest of your life.
Magdo's saying on the way in here, if you're a doctor who deals with children, teenage children, they're not that unhealthy. They're pretty healthy.
No, they're pretty healthy, yeah.
Yes.
Most of them are perfect.
So you suddenly create this person who needs hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of surgery, right?
Yes.
Paid for by an insurance company or Medicaid. Then they need constant medication for the rest of their life.
For the damage that was done.
It's a subscription service.
Yeah.
It's an evil.
Magda called it a subscription service. I thought that was a really good way of describing it.
Yes.
But just one aspect of this that just strikes me, as we say that, what kind of people would do this to children? What kind of doctors do this to children? And this is something that comes out in the workshop. And I think it's, anyway, this is so many points.
You said that. There's an awful lot of evil people out there. There seem to be.
Yes, well, also there's people who themselves are very damaged and are kind of almost justifying what they did to themselves maybe by doing this to somebody else as well. Some of the big names actually in this are trans doctors. Like one of the people we criticized in the protocol. So New York Times just did a very lengthy episodic critique, they said, of maybe it wasn't a podcast about the origins of the trans cult, I would call it, or contagion, but they didn't call it that. They thought it was all very legitimate. And then in the middle of it, they criticised the Cass report, which is this massively important report from the UK where Dr. Cass was given the job to look at what's been happening with gender medicine and basically said, this is really bad and this is going to get banned in the UK. The one person the New York Times decided to get to criticize that, the one voice they got to criticize that was a doctor. And I just looked up the doctor. And the thing that the New York Times never mentioned was that doctor is trans. That doctor has a bit of an interest in...
But some of them are not. And some of them have trans their kids, which is, they're going to be...
Well, this is a huge point, by the way.
Forever.
A lot of, you hear this when people who are like critical of what's happening with the gender affirming care. One of the things that they say, and it really makes sense. Once you hear it, it's like, to me, it's one of those things the minute you hear it, you think, okay, that makes sense to me. If you've done this to your child, your 3-year-old, 5-year-old, 7-year-old, 12-year-old, 14-year-old, 15-year-old, you've destroyed their sexual function for the rest of their lives. You've left them with, if you've had them on a lot of this testosterone, it has affected their bone density for the rest of their lives. And we're going to hear a bit of this in a moment, by the way. But if you've done that to your child, you have done the worst thing you could ever do to your child. So how do you live with yourself? So the only way to live with yourself is to never, ever admit that you've done the worst thing that you could ever, ever do to a child. You have to keep affirming it yourself, no matter what happens.
Yes. Because
how can you live with yourself?
Yes. So...
Well, we should start, by the way, we should start by listening to the chairman of the FTC.
Yeah, the chairman, they're going to go... among the false claims, and the chairman goes into this, is, they talk about reconstruction. And that's, they call double mastectomies reconstruction.
And the reason they do that, Phelim, is?
Because they can get insurance money. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
It's an insurance code from Medicaid or from the insurance company. We've got children who were prescribed testosterone, girls who were prescribed testosterone after one telephone interview. So this is the kind of thing the FTC is going to go after with the DOJ. So FTC Chairman Andrew Ferguson, he opened the event with an address that people have been waiting so long to hear. He talked about the goals of the conference and showed that this is not Joe Biden's Federal Trade Commission. He basically, as we'll hear, encouraged the mutilation of children and punished those, sent the FBI after those who wanted to expose the mutilation.
We're going to come across that in a moment.
So Andrew Ferguson starts by citing a New York Times story that revealed the Biden administration pressurized WPATH, which is supposed to be the rules-making group for transgender, but they pressurize them to cut the minimum age requirements for youth to take cross-sex hormones and have other sex change surgeries. Let's hear why they did that, and let's hear what's wrong with that. This is from Andrew Ferguson opening this workshop/conference.
The Biden administration didn't care about the parents and kids who might have relied on those requirements when deciding whether to consent to expensive hormone treatments and sex change surgeries. They didn't care about the parents and kids who might have been spared a lifetime of pain and regret if their doctors, therapists, and surgeons had observed those requirements. They cared about politics. They didn't care about people. Today, by contrast, is not about politics. It's about the parents and kids the Biden administration chose to ignore. It's about our nation's children who stand most in need of our love, protection, and support. It's about their parents whose selfless and fruitful love is the foundation of our nation and of every nation. It is about caring for the most vulnerable among us and protecting them from manipulation, deception, and abuse. It is about healing the wounds that proponents of gender-affirming care may have inflicted on our nation's children and parents and preventing the potential for future harm.
So, as we're saying, this could be the end or the beginning of the end of the destruction of children and vulnerable adults.
So immediately after he spoke, and I think it was correct in so many ways, that the first panel was made up, and we're gonna focus quite a bit on this panel because it's at the very heart of this story. And some of you watching, know this story. Maybe you know someone who's been caught up in this madness and in this horror. By the way, this complete Frankenstein horror. But for those of you who don't, it's actually really important to listen to the voices of those people who are the survivors. And the first two are amazing. It's a son and his father, Simon Price, and his father, Gareth. And this is particularly special because we get to hear this story of Simon's from two angles, both from Simon himself and from his father. And it's incredible how close they came to being destroyed, to having
destroying a child,
completely destroyed. Let's hear Simon tell his story first. Very powerful. And then we'll hear what his father had to say. Let's go there first.
If I were there again, I really wish that my doctors would have asked me about any history of sexual assault. Maybe if they would have talked about the 2 years of homophobic bullying I endured in 7th and 8th grade, where kids threatened to kill me and called me the F slur on a near daily basis. Maybe that would have helped, instead of telling me I was really a girl inside and reaffirming my delusions. I wish they told me that I was born in the right body, that I am perfect just the way I was, because nobody told me that. Nobody I paid attention to, at least. Wanted to put that in there for you, Dad. And I'm lucky.
Yeah. So
here's a guy, Simon, who had been sexually assaulted, by the way, had been bullied, had all these difficulties going on. But if it wasn't for the fact that he had this extraordinary father, who we're going to hear from in a moment
well,
here.
The therapist didn't even bother to consider the sexual assault, didn't bother to consider all the other, as it comorbidities they call it?
Absolutely.
The other parts of the person. They just, for a gender affirming doctor, when you say if you could hammer, everything's a nail,
Yeah.
For them, they had a hammer of gender affirming therapy, and everything was then gender based, even if it quite obviously wasn't.
Even if it quite honestly wasn't. But Simon, and he's so beautiful the way he talks about his father. But his father is like, and his father, by the way, is super, you'll hear the father in a moment. But the father's really cool. Like the father is works for Raytheon, but he's a data guy. So he's all about the numbers. He's all about the evidence. And what I thought was interesting, the father, hasn't got a problem if the boy is transgender. He hasn't got a problem if the boy is gay. He's got none of that problem. But he's just saying, where's the evidence? You're going to do this whole thing with him. You're going to do all
and this is and he was also looking for the evidence of the suicide statistic that they love to quote. So this, would you rather have a dead girl or a live boy, right?
Yeah.
So
this is peddled all the time.
Your daughter comes and says, "I think about a boy," or the medical establishment says you have to transition your daughter into a boy. They say she will kill herself if you keep her as a girl. You'll have a live boy. So he went and tried to find the data behind that statistic.
And shocker, he didn't find data to support what they were planning to do with his son. And so he...
Can I add, this is before Cass
Oh, yes.
Baroness
Yeah.
Cass made the exact same conclusion.
Yeah.
And everyone basically admits that's true now, except the New York Times podcast. But it's gradually becoming, and in fact, there was a doctor, Dr. Olson out of Los Angeles. She did data and got government funding for it. And when the data didn't match that statistic,
She refused. She didn't want to. She wouldn't publish the data. She wouldn't publish her research because she said she was worried it might be politicized.
Yes.
Well, that's not your business, darling. Not after you've gotten $17 million from the taxpayers.
Let's play the clip from Simon's father, Gareth.
Yes.
Yes.
At the same time that I was instructed to keep our son under close watch for self-harm, the psychiatrist at Boston Children's was telling him, behind my back, to sneak away from home and go to a transgender support group. I was counting knives in the drawers and checking on him every half hour, and she was telling him to lie to me and escape my supervision. That June, at his annual pediatric visit, my son told his doctor, who had known us for several years, that he was really a girl inside. The doctor immediately agreed and offered to refer him to GEMS. I told the doctor I thought that was absurd, as I had known the boy his entire life, and that transgenderism was a phase he would get over, a temporary result of his adolescent misery. I knew then that research supported my view, and now hindsight does too. The pediatrician told me he sent every kid who said he was transgender to GEMS. When I told the pediatrician I didn't intend to take him to GEMS, he asked me, in front of my son, whether I would like a dead son or a living daughter. That was emotional blackmail. And in my opinion, malpractice.
So, that story has a very happy ending. And as you can see, the two are, a lovely relationship, and the boy is healthy and living his life. Unfortunately, on that panel, not every story was as happy. And the next story that I want everyone to listen to, and I think it is really powerful, and we are going to focus quite a bit on these victims because their stories are very, very powerful. And one thing that struck me listening to this panel was how articulate these people were. But I suppose they've had to think an awful lot about what's happened to them. So the next story is from Claire Abernathy. And she was not so lucky. She was put on testosterone a week after her 14th birthday. And 6 months later, she was referred for a double mastectomy.
Stop calling that. It's reconstruction. That's what they say. So a double mastectomy on a 14-year-old is called reconstruction.
And it's also euphemistically called top surgery. And by the way, people need to really, this is one thing that we would say to people, do not repeat this nonsense and these, ridiculous, a double mastectomy is a double mastectomy. It's very clear what's happening. And we don't need another way of describing it.
Top surgery.
Why would you call it top surgery? The reason you call it top surgery, by the way, is because you don't want people to know what it's about. But let's play this incredible story from Claire telling her story. Claire Abernathy.
I was sold a product, medical transition, by professionals and institutions who told me that it would fix my distress and save my life. I was told that if I didn't do this, I would probably end up dead. But here's what they didn't tell me. They didn't tell me that taking cross-sex hormones and undergoing major surgery at 14 years old could leave me with pelvic floor dysfunction and urinary incontinence, problems I have to manage now as a young adult. I'm only 20 years old. They didn't tell me that these complications are common enough to be known risks, and yet they were hidden from me at an age where I didn't even understand what these terms meant, let alone the impact they would have on my daily life. And it doesn't stop there. When I tried to warn others by leaving honest reviews on my surgeon's websites, describing my regret, the complications, the lack of real informed consent, my reviews were deleted.
As she says, at 14...
At 14, she couldn't have had a tattoo, right?
Couldn't have an alcoholic drink.
Yep.
Can't vote.
No, absolutely. Yeah. There's so many things. She couldn't have joined the army. She couldn't have got married.
She can't drive a car.
But but suddenly she's mature enough to decide to completely destroy her sexual function for the rest of her life.
Then there was detransitioner Kayla Lovedoll. She started on Lupron and testosterone at the very mature age of 12. And after turning 13, had a bilateral mastectomy. That's a double
That's a double mastectomy.
Bilateral mastectomy. So let's hear what that madness, that Frankenstein process did to her. Let's play that clip now.
The mastectomy was explained to me at 12 using watered-down terms like top surgery. I was told I would never be able to chest feed. I was told I might lose sensation, but to me, at 12, that equated to numbness. But today I deal with nerve pain, extreme slicing sensations, electrical zaps, and itchiness. I could scratch my skin until I bleed, but with no relief because the skin is numb and doesn't register touch. However, the nerves underneath are erratic. I'm nearing 8 years post-op this September. As you can probably all tell, my voice is permanently lowered from the testosterone I took from 12 to 17. I do have a slight Adam's apple. I can't raise my voice for long periods of time. I can't scream if I'm in danger. Mind you, I'm a pretty small person, standing at about 4'11". I still grow facial hair that I have to deal with. I have atrophy and urinary issues. Testosterone also damaged my liver. I've had fatty liver disease since about 14. The Lupron essentially put my body in menopause. I gained weight. My psychiatric issues flared up. I experienced intense hot flashes, which made it really difficult to focus on my 7th grade homework. Today, I live with chronic joint pain. I'm only 20. At no point along the way was I offered an off-ramp.
So we should say there's a very, very powerful testimony.
And yeah, we've actually decided that, for right now, for this podcast, we're going to hold back on the last testimony, which is absolutely extraordinary. And
we're going to play it at the end.
So at the end, we're going to play this testimony from this mother in full without comment because it needs no commentary from us, but it's very, very powerful. And we're going to play it in full at the very end. So please hang on for that.
It just needs no comment. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It needs no comment. It needs no comment from us.
So the next person that we're going to go to is a whistleblower from a pediatric gender center, Jamie Reed. I mean, she's a big name in the. It's very interesting because she was a believer. She really believed in this. She's lesbian herself, I think.
Yes.
She holds a Master's of Science, by the way, in Clinical Research Management from Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. She's a lifelong Democrat. I'm quoting from her, and she's a mom of 5 boys, 3 of whom were adopted out of foster care system, and she's a lesbian. And she's also the public whistleblower from inside a pediatric gender. So she herself oversaw the transitioning of nearly 1,500 unique people, ranging in ages, and you just have to take a moment here to just, take this in, ranging in ages from 3 to 26.
Repeat that. What was the youngest?
The youngest was 3. And the idea, by the way, we've just been spending a bit of time with a 7-year-old, by the way, and a wonderful 7-year-old that's very important.
Very intelligent 7-year-old.
And a very intelligent 7-year-old. But you know what? I wouldn't be taking advice off him now on anything, actually.
Well,
he's marvellous now.
He was able to tell me that the capital of Northern Ireland was Belfast, but it isn't the real capital because that's in London. And he's American. I should add, he's American. He's American.
We're not even going to talk anymore about him. But the idea that somebody listened to a 3-year-old, it's really, really frightening. Anyway. Let's listen to Jamie Reed and her journey, by the way, from being a true believer and why she changed her mind. Let's listen to that now.
I was once a true believer in pediatric gender medicine. Now I understand I participated in an industry that was based on fraud, deception, and in layman's terms, we were running a racket. Patients with significant comorbidities were treated using unethical and deceptive informed consent practices. They were never properly assessed, informed of their condition, or given a diagnosis. A diagnosis itself is the first required step for any consent to be valid and not fraudulent. These were also vulnerable patients who required specific, special safeguards. First, they were minor patients and should have been provided all of the safeguarding protections we would want for all children. Second, they had significantly presenting comorbidities, often falling within the definition of a stigmatizing complex medical disease, some even meeting the criteria for a legal medical disability. We were harming disabled children. These comorbidities include, but are not limited to, autism spectrum disorders, anxiety, depression, borderline personality disorders, eating disorders, self-harming behaviors, somatization disorders, learning disabilities, ADHD, and significant trauma histories. Third, many of the presenting patients before the social contagion cohort would eventually, if not medically treated, become homosexuals, like me. That is, they will identify as adults as gay, lesbian, or bisexual. The entire diagnosis is based on regressive stereotypes and self-described feelings from minor children and their parents. My clinical experience shows that these, quote, biopsychosocial assessments are not consistent, comprehensive, or truly diagnostic. For an assessment to be diagnostic, there is a very simple way to prove if it actually is so. It is so simple that so many of us actually forget it. There must be a statistically significant number of patients who will not ever meet the diagnostic criteria. So in lay terms, there has to be a statistically significant number of patients and parents who would have been consistently told no by these centers. That never happens.
So I think that point she makes is so important, from the medical establishment, because doctors, by the way, and medical experts know this, but the public don't know this. But the minute you hear it, you think, oh, I get that. I understand that. So if you turn up to a doctor and say, I think, and by the way, it just reminds me, hundreds of years ago, I lived in an apartment in Portugal, and I shared with a number of people, and one person in it suffered from chronic, she chronically thought she was sick all the time. She had a real problem with that, and she was constantly coming up with things. And she would turn up regularly at hospitals and tell them that she had cancer. And they took her seriously. Like, she was taken in and kept and all of that. So basically, everyone who turns up and says to a doctor, I think I've got...
Yes.
I don't know, whatever. The doctor, can you imagine if the doctor always said, you know what, you're right?
Yes.
The truth is, we don't always know,
Or if it turns out that 100% of people turned up who self-diagnosed were accurate. That's actually more, they turn up and say, I've got diabetes, and after testing, they are found to be 100% correct. It's not that the doctor, because the doctor goes through a process after, a so-called process. So people turn up and say, I've got this gender thing, and the doctor goes, oh, let's do some tests and a phone call and an interview. You're right. 100% of the time, there is zero person found not to be suffering from the syndrome that. So
because and the word from above, we'll talk about the words from above in a moment, but the word from above basically is affirm, 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 and it's interesting, even the word they use,
yes,
gender affirming care,
By the way, medicine should never be about affirming.
No. No, actually, you're right. Exactly. Medicine should never be about affirming and never about satisfying the patient, by the way. It should be satisfying, it should be doing what's right.
Yes.
And not satisfying, because people can have very screwed up ideas about what actually should be done for themselves.
But also, if you think, if you've got a year to live, but let's satisfy the patient, tell them it's 5 years, or tell them there's nothing wrong with you. Most patients would be satisfied with that. It would be a lie. What do you think it is? Is it that why is it affirming? Why did I suppose it's...
Well, I think, and I think we're going to we're going to come to this in a way, because I think quite a lot of the pressure here is coming from the LGBTQ community. And by the way, I almost feel like extracting LGB out of that, because I think it's super unfair.
It's a TQ.
So many people that we've talked to from LG, particularly lesbians and gays that we've talked to, they don't want anything to do with transgender because they're not mentally ill. And they're obviously the transgender thing is a completely different thing. But we are now going to go on to talk about Miriam Grossman, right?
Yes. So our friend, child psychiatrist, Dr. Miriam Grossman, she spoke next at the conference, and she gave a masterclass on the left's abuse of vocabulary and how they've managed to weaponize it to control how doctors treat their patients. She goes to a certain extent to explain, how the medical, not so much the medical establishment, but the next tier down, how they've been misled and how they mislead young minds to think they might be born into the wrong body. She started with the history of transgenderism. Dr. John Money, we know him well. He was a trans...
It's a really sad story. The John Money story, which a lot of the trans community tried to suppress, or certainly the medical establishment seemed to be, and certainly the New York Times, as we pointed out in our recent Substack. John Money started working, had a gender clinic in Johns Hopkins, by the way, not any kind of fringe institution, but an incredibly highly respected medical institution in the United States, John Money. And in a tragic set of circumstances, twin little boys were brought there, one of whom had been very seriously damaged during a circumcision and had lost his penis, basically. And the parents were really in an awful state, didn't know what to do. Unfortunately, heard about Dr. John Money, went there. Dr. John Money then seized on these little boys as a way to prove a theory that he believed in, which was that gender was fluid, that it was something that was cultural, that it was something that was learned, that it wasn't something indigenous to your body and organic to your body, actually. And he basically said to the parents, you know what? Bring up that little boy, the one who's damaged, bring him up as a girl. He'll never know the difference. And the results were catastrophic. Absolutely catastrophic. The parents did eventually tell the little boy who had been living as a girl, they eventually told him when he was 14, and his reaction was complete relief.
Yes.
Because he said couldn't work out why he never felt right. It's a dreadful story.
Yes.
We've, as I said, we talk about it in our Substack, which we'll link to in the show notes. But as I said, ends in really tragic end. That little boy did grow up, did end up managing to get married and all of that, but then killed himself.
Yeah.
And his brother overdosed. So horrific. And Dr. John Money, by the way, when they would be brought year after year after year to that gender clinic at Johns Hopkins, he would sexually abuse them. He would show them pornography. Yeah. It's a real horror show. And if you ever notice people talking about the history of the trans movement and they don't talk about John Money, they're hiding something very, very significant. And there's a reason they're doing it. Yeah. And the whole thing of gender affirmation comes from him.
And a lot of the terms and the idea of gender being fluid all comes from this evil man.
Yeah.
So Miriam did talk about that at the beginning, and then she talked about the language of preferred pronouns.
Yes.
and how it can actually lead vulnerable children to believe they're born in the wrong body. Let's hear her talk about how the medical establishment is misleading and using wrong words and bad words, and I suppose they're actually illegal words now. That's the thing, to talk about genital reconstruction. That's actually a criminal offense because you're getting money under false pretenses. First of all, you're harming people under false pretenses, but then you're getting either federal money from the government or money from insurance companies. And we're not talking thousands. We're not talking tens of thousands. We're talking hundreds of thousands, millions. Some doctors are making millions.
Okay, let's play that right now.
Yeah.
Preferred pronouns. If you can pick your pronouns, it means that your feelings determine who you are. And it means, again, that biology is inconsequential. Preferred pronouns are part of social transitioning, and we know that social transitioning increases the odds that gender dysphoria will persist. Nevertheless, the captured American Association of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry instructs parents, use the name and pronouns your child prefers. Chicago Children's Hospital have pronoun stickers for staff. And the pressure is intense, trust me. I've talked to a lot of people working in hospitals. The pressure is very intense for staff to wear these pronoun stickers. In my opinion, using opposite sex pronouns endorses something that can never be. It supports a patient's false belief, and it impacts their medical decisions. So that's fraud right there. Sex assigned at birth. The purpose of that phrase is to lead people to think that male and female are a random designation, a doctor's whim. This is utterly false. I don't have time to discuss intersex. You're going to be hearing about it later. But the sex assigned at birth term, which we hear 24/7 everywhere, is designed to change the way that we think about male and female. Instead of it being a inherent quality of every one of the billions of cells in our body. Cisgender and non-binary. The word cisgender was invented in 1994 by a graduate student at the University of Minnesota. The inventor explained, there did not seem to be a way to describe people who were not transgender without inescapably couching them in normalcy and making transgender identity automatically the other. This student was unhappy, in other words, about how the transgender identity was perceived. And the goal of creating the word cisgender was to change that perception. So again, the goal was to change how we think. We are given the impression that cisgender is a scientific classification of people, but it's not. Non-binary, we are told this is a valid identity for people who are both male and female, neither male and female, or some other combination of male and female. Kaiser Permanente provides this menu of non-binary options. We might think this is silly, and it is, but to vulnerable youth, it means that they can have a new identity every day of the month. If identity is based on feelings and you feel different from day to day, then why not? Do you see why so many young people are confused? Wrong puberty, that's a disturbing one. Puberty is not a disease. You're going to hear more about that from Dr. Cretella. Using that phrase is profoundly misleading, as if someone can go through the wrong puberty. Top and bottom surgery, these are dangerous euphemisms. They're meant to distract you from what they really are: the removal of healthy organs causing disfigurement and a laundry list of serious medical problems, as you've just heard. And you'll hear more about that from Dr. Lappert. Justice Thomas called top and bottom surgery sanitizing language, and he got that right. Genital reconstruction, nope. Reconstruction means that that particular genitals were once there. That's demonstrably false. A surgical procedure that creates a faux vagina is not reconstruction, it's construction.
I really, really like the point she makes about cisgender, you know, which people now use. And by the way, like, it was a kid who came up with that cisgender. And I just I love that whole thing. The next piece, we are going to play a second clip from Miriam Grossman, because it's really, really, you know, when I read this first, I thought, if it was a Babylon Bee story, it would, you know, it basically is a Babylon Bee story, except for it's actually true.
Yes.
And the problem is, it's not only true, but it's incredibly sad. That's why it doesn't really work very well as Babylon Bee story. It's like a joke, but it's so ludicrous. It's like a joke, but unfortunately, it's incredibly sad what's happened. And to think that this is the New England, what is it? The New England Journal of Medicine. The New England, and we're putting up on screen there, you'll see the headline from the New England Journal of Medicine. Just to realize how people will look back on this in history. People will look back on this in history and laugh at all the people and laugh and cry about what happened here. And in this case, because of this madness, a little baby died and didn't need to die. Let's play that. Let's play that clip right now.
Now, fraudulent language in medical records. I'm going to tell you about this case that was reported in the New England Journal of Medicine. I'm not giving you all the details. This is a very concise review. And this article in the New England Journal called this woman a man and he, him pronouns, so I'm going to go ahead and do that, even though I normally wouldn't. 32-year-old Sam came to the emergency room. He had intermittent lower abdominal pain and high blood pressure. He told the triage nurse that he was a transgender man. His electronic medical record indicated he was male. The nurse noted that Sam was an obese man and he was comfortable between his bouts of pain. She assessed his condition as non-urgent. Lab tests were ordered, including a pregnancy test. It took several hours for Sam to finally be seen by a physician who took a detailed history, reviewed his lab results, and did a physical exam. He determined that Sam was in labor and had preeclampsia, which is an emergency that can be fatal for mother and child. A heartbeat could not be found on the ultrasound, and soon thereafter, Sam delivered a stillborn baby. Though he had obviously not planned or expected the pregnancy, he was heartbroken, and the loss of his baby produced a major depressive episode. The language of medical records must be accurate. There was once a standard way to indicate a patient's sex in medical records, but no longer.
Then we went to a panel where the panel kind of looked at how the whole thing has been politicized, but also weaponized by law enforcement. And we looked at the case of Ethan Phelim, who's a doctor
from Texas Children's Hospital. And I just love this guy. I thought this guy was fantastic. So he started out, a young guy in a hospital, trainee in a hospital, started to see stuff going on at by the way, Texas Children's Hospital, Texas, by the way, where you'd expect better. Started to notice this stuff. He became basically a whistleblower. So, but one of the things that he says that I think is really interesting, and he answers this question, because you might be watching and you might say to yourself, why are doctors not speaking out? Because actually it's a really good point. What about, where are the good doctors? He answers that question of what's happened to the good doctor. And
at the Texas Children's Hospital, we're running a secret gender clinic in the
secret
hospital.
Gender clinic, which was secret, from law and from the legislators in Texas, but more importantly, it was secret from parents. Let's listen to Dr. Heim tell his story.
And I'm sure that many of you are wondering, there's so much deception in this field. Where are the doctors? Like, why are there not other doctors who are speaking up? And all of this happened with me blowing the whistle during my training. And I saw it firsthand myself. There is a code of silence that exists among physicians in the profession today. If you break that code, then you will be targeted in the most vicious way possible. Because when I found out that the hospital I was working at, Texas Children's, which is one of the most amazing hospitals, in the country for taking care of kids, but they had this program that was harming these kids that had no basis in scientific or biological reality. They were doing this to children and they were lying about it. So I blew the whistle in May of 2023. There was a law passed the next day. More whistleblowers spoke out. Vanessa Civic, who you'll hear about later today. And the hospital said that they were shutting down the program. But in response to that, I was targeted by the most powerful federal leviathan in human history. They tried to send me to prison for 10 years. I was charged with more felonies than some of our country's most prolific criminals. And this was for a crime that I had never committed, that the DOJ could never even define, where no patient had actually been harmed. They were using HIPAA as a basis for their indictment, even though the victims, they said, were the hospital and the doctors, not the patients, the hospital.
Yeah, so then they tried to prosecute him for HIPAA violations. And they
wanted to put him in prison for 10 years.
Yep.
Yeah. And he didn't harm anyone. And as you say, they tried to go after him for HIPAA. And HIPAA, all the American people in the audience know what HIPAA is. Basically, it's privacy, that your records are all private. Doctors, can't mention your name. He didn't mention anyone's name, publicly. He talked about this stuff in general. So when he came out and all hell broke loose, a nurse in the hospital who had been feeling under unbelievable pressure because of this stuff and seeing things and being asked to do things that went not alone against her ethics, but went against her she was a Christian. She was, delighted to hear about him, and she immediately came forward and started to speak up.
And what happened to her then?
And you can't, unbelievable. And you'll hear her in a moment, but just a lovely person. The FBI arrived at her door and she captured it, by the way, on a Ring camera, and I'm going to find that, and we're going to play that as well at the end. We'll first of all listen to her, but I'm also going to find the Ring camera, and we're going to have that, because the FBI arrived at her door. She was there with her husband.
She went from thinking she had got the best job of her life working as a nurse working in Texas Children's Hospital. I mean, it must have been it was an amazing job, and it's kind of the height of her profession. And suddenly she's working at she's there, and there's an unofficial gender clinic.
Oh yeah. So first of all, the FBI come after her, and subsequently she gets fired. But since Trump put Kennedy in at HHS, he is now investigating why she was fired, and we're hoping that she gets reinstated. It's an incredible story. Let's listen to that now.
I had a crisis of conscience one day when a physician, the transgender physician, asked me to do patient teaching, which is not uncommon. Nurses do a lot of patient teaching in the hospital. But on this particular day, I walked into a patient's room and I was asked by the doctor to instruct them on how to administer an intramuscular injection. What I didn't know was that this child, this boy, was going to administer estrogen to himself to affirm the false identity that he had adopted. And realizing that I enabled him to do that was devastating to me. I considered quitting my job. I could no longer play an indirect role in perpetuating these harms against children. Until one day in May of 2023, when I read an article by an anonymous whistleblower within Texas Children's Hospital, who had come forward courageously to expose that the hospital had been secretly providing transgender treatments to children, had hidden this from parents and from lawmakers in the state of Texas. And I knew this to be true because I was the nurse, one of the nurses working at this clinic that was supposedly non-existent. This person is Dr. Eitan Heim, without whom I would not be here today.
And then let's play the Ring doorbell camera or
Yeah, let's play the Ring doorbell now and see just what happened to her.
Hello? Hi. I'm looking for Vanessa Sivage. Okay. Yeah. Who are you? Cassie. I'll make some FBI agent. Okay. This is Mr. McBride. Hey, I'm David McBride. Okay. Nice to meet you, sir. It's a really pleasant interaction. You're not in trouble nor is she. Okay. All right. Hi, how are you? She snuck up on you there. You want to see too? Are we interrupting dinner? I'm really sorry.
That's all right. What's going on?
Let me start at the beginning. So I'm sure you're aware of some of the things that have been going on at your work lately.
With regards to?
Yeah. So I gotta. Can we sit down for a minute? Let me do my song and dance.
that's what happens. So that's what happens to you when you annoy Democrats, basically. The FBI comes to you.
When you try and do the right thing, by the way, and it just shows you how, so it again proves the point that anyone who tries to criticize this ideology, this madness, the whole world falls down on them until, well, certainly during the Biden administration, but obviously we have a new day has dawned and things are better. And also at the Department of Justice. So the Department of Justice were also represented in this workshop.
I like this. I like the department. See, this is why this is not a talking shop. This is why this is not a, it's almost wrong. It's called a workshop. I don't think it's right. It's not a conference either. This is a battle plan. This is them said.
Day one of the battle, but it's not day one.
Chad Mazel, who's the DOJ chief of staff. These are people, the Federal Trade Commission and the DOJ. It's not like, CPAC or something. These have law enforcement wings. They have powers to issue subpoenas, search warrants. And he was there to update people about current investigations. So he listed all the fraud and abuse that has been committed in the name of transient children. Let's play that clip.
There's a basic principle of law. You cannot deceive consumers. You cannot lie to them to get them to buy your products, use your services. You cannot commit fraud. This is true in providing medical services, but also more generally. There's no doubt in my mind, based not only on what we've heard here today, but just looking around with our own eyes, that the industry that is formed around providing gender-affirming care and transitioning services for children has perpetuated one of the greatest frauds on the American public. And that is especially true with respect to our vulnerable children and their parents. One of the most important tasks of government is to prevent this fraud from continuing and to remedy the consequences of this fraud in recent years. The FTC has a very broad mandate and a consumer protection mandate specifically with powerful investigative tools attached to that. It's very well positioned to tackle this issue, and I would like to thank all the commissioners and particularly my dear friend Chairman Ferguson for the great work that he is doing on this front. The DOJ also has numerous civil and criminal tools to root out fraud. We are focusing these tools on everyone who is involved in the multi-billion-dollar industry of harming our kids. And I want to point out a couple things that we're doing. First, with respect to civil and criminal fraud, Although the exact details of the public, of the targets of our investigation are not yet public, we have issued nearly 20 subpoenas against clinics who are engaged in transition-related investigations. Thank you. We're investigating violations such as healthcare fraud, false statements, all of this which could result in either civil or criminal liability for these clinics. We have also investigations into hospitals and other providers related to fraudulent billing, false claims under Medicaid fraud and the False Claims Act. We're going after false and deceptive claims by nonprofits and medical associations that have provided false, deceptive, or scientifically dubious assertions about transition-related medical interventions, allegedly as cover for the clinics and the hospitals to be able to do what they're doing. And finally, we've issued subpoenas to major manufacturers of the drugs used in trans-related medical interventions for possible violations of drug marketing laws and the Food and Drug Cosmetic Act. We've also prepared draft legislation. We're working with Congress on existing criminal laws related to female genital mutilation to more robustly protect children from chemical and surgical mutilation. And we're continuing to work with Congress about enhancing the ability of injured parties to seek remedies, to get recourse, because as you all know, that is so important. The way you're going to take down this multi-billion-dollar industry is for people to speak out, which is exactly what we're about to hear. We are using all of the tools at the Department of Justice to address this issue. Now, before I introduce, I do want to give a shout out. If you are somebody who has been harmed in this industry, let us know. If you are a parent, if you are a child, if you were somebody who was lied to, deceived, told that a particular pill might be reversible when we all know it's not actually reversible, we want to know about that. That will help us in all of our investigations, not just on the civil side, but on the criminal side. So please come forward, come talk to us. We have DOJ representatives. I think here at the conference, some of them spoke. Obviously, I'm going to be here. If you guys have any questions about how to get a hold of us, you can reach out to any of the FTC staff who we work very, very closely with. But please continue to reach out to us.
And he's actually, if you notice there, he's asked people to come forward, victims to come forward. It's great the way he welcomes more victims to come forward, but also this is serious. There are doctors we know, and that Irish doctor, Sive Gallagher, she must be getting very nervous. I would suspect she'll leave America and go to Ireland.
Well, actually, funny enough, they actually put a photograph up. Actually, during Miriam Grossman's speech, she put up a photograph of her because, I mean, this is a woman from Ireland who is doing these surgeries in Florida, and she has a TikTok account where she talks about zeeting the teats. Like, she makes a joke about how many girls she has done double mastectomies on, and she makes a joke of it. And I just find it extraordinary, by the way, that she hasn't lost her license just for being so flippant, unprofessional and flippant about surgery, without even getting into the details of how awful it is what she's doing. But one of the points that I just loved about this workshop, as you say, Phelim, workshop, conference, whatever we call it. But, and by the way, we will also put a link, by the way, where you can watch the whole conference if you want to, because it really is very, very powerful. So we also got to hear from a guy called Leo Sapir, who is from the Manhattan Institute. He has a PhD in political science from Boston College. But he talked about a thing, and I think he has coined this phrase himself, and I loved it. He talked about credibility laundering, which I thought was so good. Because one of the things that happens to parents, they end up in a doctor's office, and the doctor, and they might ask questions. They might say, "Is that what? Oh my God, that sounds extraordinary." And the doctor says, "The American Association of Pediatrics said," or "The American Medical Association said."
Recommends.
Recommends. And you think, you're just a regular person, and you hear that and you think, by the way, how many pediatricians do you think there are in America? 10,000, 100,000? Like 100,000, maybe more than 100,000 pediatricians. So you suddenly think, oh my God, 100,000 doctors agree on this, but I'm only from up there, I only work in whatever, I wouldn't have a notion about this. You get this idea that there's this huge consensus and that this is a democracy, and somehow
So then he explains how the American Association of Pediatrics
operate
and how they came to recommend all these drastic surgeries and mutilations on children. In 2018, the AAP, the American Association of Pediatrics, allowed one young medical resident by the name of Jason Rafferty to write its policy statement in support of gender transition for minors. The statement asserts that children have indisputable knowledge of their transgender identity. This is written by one person, a medical resident, he hadn't got 20
and
years.
how many editions of that particular judgment from this young person were published.
So let's go over and let's hear Leon Sapir describe the history of credibility washing, I think I want to come up with a better word.
I kind of like credibility washing. The minute I heard it, I thought, yeah, that's something, but yeah, we credibility laundering.
That's it.
Sorry, credibility laundering.
Laundering.
Yes.
No, laundering's a better word.
Yes.
It really is. It's one or two activists. So what these people do is the committee of 40 people hive that particular problem off to one or two people, Jason Rafferty. They then write a highly biased, often ideological recommendation, and that is adopted by the committee and sent out to all the members, and then the parents are told.
And also, see, people are kind of lazy too, by the way. So they got this young person to do this, and then it was like, it's done now. And it suddenly became law, basically, and it became the rule. Let's hear Leon. Let's hear Leor explain this.
Explain that.
Now, a key element of WPATH strategy has been what I've called credibility laundering. Medical associations with broader scope and larger memberships have specialized subcommittees dealing with LGBTQ issues, which today means primarily gender medicine. And these groups are WPATH aligned or even affiliated. For example, Dr. Erin Jansen of Lurie Children's Hospital is co-chair of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry's Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Issues Committee. Incidentally, he's also a WPATH member and co-author of WPATH's 8th Standard of Care. It's not just medical associations that produce a broken chain of trust. Medical journals are also responsible. We now have a large body of evidence demonstrating that medical journals have lowered or abandoned their editorial standards when publishing research purporting to show benefits from pediatric transition, and they also suppress or decline to publish critical commentaries on these studies. Leaders in the medical field may be forgiven for assuming that if a study reports improvement in mental health as a result of, say, cross-sex hormone therapy, that report is credible because it went through peer review. Again, the broken chain of trust. So to summarize, the medical transition of minors is a good example of medicine's failure to self-regulate. That failure is due not only to the broken chain of trust, which I've highlighted here, but also to the climate of intimidation activists have created within the medical field against any medical professional who would dare question gender medicine or its foundational concepts. As Dr. Hilary Cass wrote in her important report from last year, quote, "There are few other areas of healthcare where professionals are so afraid to openly discuss their views, where people are vilified on social media, and where name-calling echoes the worst bullying behavior. This must stop."
So this was a day-long event, and we could go on for 4 hours, by the way, here with clips from it. And as I said, we'll give you a link if you want to watch all of it. It's absolutely amazing. And I think in our show next week, we're probably going to have a few more of the speakers because it was that good. But as we said at the very beginning, and we're coming to the end of the show now, as we said at the very beginning, we want to end with the voice of one particular victim. But just before we do that, I want to say, by the way, we got an enormous number of responses to last week's podcast, an enormous number of very, very nice messages about Jamie O'Mahony, who was assaulted at the speech down in
an anti-Semitic attack. He produced a Israeli flag at an event and was attacked. Ireland is the most anti-Semitic country in Europe. And we've had enormous response.
People have been very supportive. And Jamie, it's become a worldwide story.
Yes.
It's been reported in the Jerusalem Post. It's been reported widely. By the way, not getting reported very widely in Ireland, however.
No, it's not reported in the Irish media at all. So a student gets attacked by a professor, by the way.
Professor, but no, that doesn't make the news in Ireland. So we got this lovely comment, just one comment, and I thought I'd read this.
I want to say, I think we got the most comments to any show we've ever done. I think we're at 500 comments now.
Okay, so we got this comment, and I did think we would read it out, and I think Jamie would appreciate this. As a Jew, we got this from Tracy Linda 95995. As a Jew in Northern Ireland, I was tearful with pride when Jamie stood up for us. Brave young man. I immediately noticed the sheer pathological hatred in the face of the old man. It was unbelievable in a guy that assaulted him. So thank you very much, Tracy, for saying that. So as I said at the beginning of the show, we said there was one of the victims from the first panel that we would keep to the end because, and as we said a number of times, she needs no introduction, she needs no commentary. We would like you to hear her story and we want you to hear it in full.
Yes, it's the story of Elvira Syed.
And her child.
And her child. She died later by suicide. Let's just hear the whole story.
And we look forward to seeing you next week. And please actually give us comments on your thoughts on all of those speakers and anything that you have to say about the trans thing, because I think it's something we have tried, I think, in a way we've tried to avoid because it's so evil. It's genuinely evil. Dr. Miriam Grossman said, as a clinical, she's a child psychiatrist. She said in a very long career, and she knows a lot about evil. Her people were killed in the Holocaust. She knows a thing or two about evil, and she said this is pure evil. So please do let us know what your comments are. But we're going to let the podcast end listening to Elvira and tell her story.
Good morning, everyone. First, I want to thank FTC for having me here and giving me this opportunity to share the tragic story of our family. My name is Elvira Said, and I lost my I'm sorry. I lost my 18-year-old daughter. Eileen. To gender ideology. And to a system that failed her at every step. Eileen was exceptional. Despite being on autism spectrum, she spoke 4 languages, played 5 instruments, held 2 black belts in martial arts, and earned a full tuition scholarship to Rider University. But behind all those accomplishments was a young woman silently battling anxiety, depression, trauma, and self-harm, especially after losing her father to cancer at age 12. During the pandemic, like many other kids, she spent too much time online. And after cycling through several LGBTQ labels, she finally declared she was transgender. Before college, she began seeing a therapist who immediately affirmed her identity. No question asked, no effort to understand her trauma or mental health, no curiosity about why this identity emerged so suddenly. When she got to campus, things got worsened. She cut me off. And at the age of 17, at that point, she was introduced to a transgender pastor from Metropolitan Community Church in Hartford. Someone who barely knew her, but filed a complaint against me with the Department of Children and Families. Why? Because I refused to accept my son's identity. The goal was to remove me so the state could step in and give Eileen all the care she supposedly needed. From that moment, I lost any access to my daughter. I would like to thank Project Veritas for taking a deeper investigation and finding out that that pastor who filed that complaint against me was providing free binders to minors behind their parents' back. In January 2024, Eileen began therapy at the Pride Center, referred by Rider University. The therapist there, a transgender man, also affirmed her. And I have to wonder, was this therapist affirming Eileen solely because that's what modern guidelines encourage? Or was it also because of her own subjective viewpoint, her personal identity? Was this care or ideology disguised as therapy? In a therapist's own notes, she documented Eileen's history of self-harm, suicidal ideation, and autism spectrum disorder. On one entry, she wrote, "The client stated that most of the time he's feeling blank, when he zones out or can't remember, and other times it is like he's watching himself through a screen." To me, this is a massive red flag. Dissociation, detachment, instability. But no follow-up was done. No second opinion. No attempt to contact me, her only living parent. Instead, the therapist reinforced Eileen's belief that I was unsafe to be around and referred her to an endocrinologist. When I finally saw the endocrinologist notes after Eileen's death, they mentioned only anxiety and depression. Nothing about suicidal thoughts, nothing about trauma, nothing about self-harm. Her visit was marked as a well visit. There was no physical exam, no mention of the visible scars on her arms, no signs that her condition was truly assessed, and absolutely no indication of an endocrine disorder that would justify a prescription for hormones. And when talking about side effects, the only side effect discussed was fertility. On that very first visit, Eileen was given a prescription for 40 milligrams of testosterone per week and a referral for double mastectomy on that very first visit. In that referral letter, the doctor, or APRN, falsely claimed that Eileen had dreamed of being a boy since age 8. That was never true. My insurance was charged for this against my will. When I saw this pharmacy alert, I was horrified. Testosterone can increase aggression, emotional numbness, and suicidal thoughts, especially in a vulnerable, unstable teen. But no one stopped to ask if it was safe. On just her second visit, APRN increased her dose to 60 milligrams per week. Even though her chart noted worsening side effects like acne and bleeding, her testosterone level at that point was 289. For reference, the normal female range does not exceed 45. In October 2024, my daughter died by suicide. She overdosed on Benadryl. Her body lay in her dorm for 4 days before anyone found her. The school waited another day to call me. During that time, they were celebrating National Coming Out Day. The autopsy revealed new self-harm wounds on her thighs. According to the detective report, her friends said Eileen's depression was getting worse. She was struggling, and she was having difficulty with transition. Those entrusted with her care didn't treat her depression. They didn't explore what was underneath the identity. They didn't even tell me what was going on. They treated her ideology, not her illness. What she got instead was a fast-track prescription and an ideology that told her pain was proof she needed to keep going down that path. Eileen deserved better. Every child does. And answering your question, Chairman Ferguson, what would I wish was different? I wish Eileen had met the very true therapist who would really care about her, not about promoting an ideology on a vulnerable teen. Because therapy is not identity validation. It's a life and death guidance, and if done poorly, it leads to the irreversible, sometimes fatal consequences.